Welcome to Red Horizons, the podcast where science fiction meets revolution. I'm your host, Steve McPhail, and in this first episode of our journey through speculative worlds and radical ideas, we're heading to the red planet itself. Not just to dream about its future, but to interrogate the forces that try to shape it. Our focus today is Red Mars, the first novel in Kim Stanley Robinson's epic trilogy. It's a story of colonization, transformation, struggle, and revolution. But more than that, it's a mirror held up to Earth, a speculative test site for ideology, capitalism, ecological control, and radical resistance. As we trace the arc of this novel, we'll be engaging with a range of leftist thinkers. Voices that help us understand the deeper structures at play in this narrative. Karl Marx's critique of capital will help us untangle the threads of economic domination that stretch from Earth to Mars. Frantz Fanon's work on colonialism and decolonization will give us tools to analyze Mars as a colonized world. Naomi Klein and Andreas Malm's insights into climate politics and ecological resistance will guide us through the environmental ideologies embedded in terraforming. David Harvey's geographical materialism will illuminate a spatial production of Martian cities and economies. And revolutionary theorists like Rosa Luxemburg and Antonio Gramsci will help us make sense of the turning point, the moment when order fractures and revolt ignites. We'll begin with a look at terraforming itself, not as a neutral scientific project, but as an ideological act that reflects the values and priorities of those who wield power. Then we'll turn to the role of science and knowledge production, exploring how even the most idealistic figures become entangled in systems of control. From there, we'll examine the structures of class struggle that emerge in the Martian society as inequality, exploitation, and resistance replicate the worst features of capitalism on Earth. And finally, we'll witness the revolutionary rupture that shakes the very foundations of this new world. Red Mars isn't just a story about the future. It's a warning, a provocation, and, if we listen closely, a guide. It reminds us that wherever we go, we carry our systems with us. But it also shows us that those systems can break, and that another world is possible. So strap in, comrades. The air is thin, the gravity's low, and the struggle for the soul of Mars is just beginning. Segment 1. Terraforming and Ideology. Terraforming in Red Mars is introduced as a technical feat, the reshaping of a hostile world into a habitable one. But it's also something else, a projection of Earth's ideological assumptions onto a new frontier. Mars is framed as a blank slate, an empty canvas awaiting human inscription. Yet as any decolonial theorist will remind us, there is no such thing as an empty land. The notion of an uninhabited wilderness is a colonial myth, one used to justify conquest and control, whether on Earth or on Mars. At the heart of this narrative lies the question, who gets to decide what Mars becomes? The process of terraforming is framed in scientific and technocratic language, but it's never politically neutral. From the earliest moments, decisions about how to transform the Martian environment are shaped by the interests of capital, states, and ideological blocs. The capitalist powers of Earth, the United States, Russia, Japan, and increasingly transnational megacorporations, don't fund Martian colonization out of scientific curiosity. They do it for profit, control, and the promise of a new market. Terraforming is a tool in that arsenal, a way to tame and commodify a planet. Naomi Klein's work in This Changes Everything is instructive here. She argues that our approach to the climate crisis is often filtered through the lens of market logic, seeking techno fixes and engineering projects rather than structural transformation. Terraforming in Red Mars reflects that same mindset. Rather than adapt human systems to new ecologies, the plan is to remake the ecology to fit capitalist systems. Mars becomes not a site of mutual transformation, but a territory to be bent to human will, and, more precisely, to the will of capital. Similarly, Andreas Malm in Fossil Capital reminds us that technological change is never simply about efficiency or progress. It's about control. On Mars, the vast geoengineering projects, from orbital mirrors to greenhouse gas factories, are sold as collective scientific triumphs, but they also consolidate power in the hands of those who manage infrastructure, control resources, and dictate the pace and direction of planetary change. In this sense, terraforming becomes an ideological project, an assertion of dominance over nature and a replication of the logic of extraction. Mars is not just being made livable, it's being made governable, ownable, profitable. The Martian surface becomes an investment, a property, a site of future speculation. The dream of a new world collapses into the mechanics of the old one. We see this tension play out in the arguments between the colonists themselves. Sax Russell, the ardent terraformist, sees no problem with massive environmental manipulation. For him, transforming Mars is a scientific imperative. But others, like Anne Claiborne, resist. She sees the planet as valuable in its untouched state, worthy of preservation. While her stance is often read as environmentalist, it also carries the seeds of a deeper critique. She challenges the anthropocentric assumption that everything must be shaped for human use, a stance that echoes the radical ecological perspectives of thinkers like Murray Bookchin and the deep ecology movement, which call for a fundamental rethinking of our relationship to nature. Yet even Claiborne's resistance exists within a limited framework. The question is rarely asked, who decides how the planet is shaped? The first 100, those initial scientists and engineers, are not elected representatives. They are elite experts, chosen by institutions with deep ties to existing power structures. Even the most idealistic among them rarely question the legitimacy of their authority over an entire world. This is where Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth becomes relevant. Fanon reminds us that colonialism is not just about physical occupation. It's about epistemology, about who's allowed to speak, to name, to imagine. The settlers on Mars, however conflicted, however noble, arrive with the assumption that they can define Mars's future. The Martian landscape is stripped of agency, treated as passive matter for human will. This is the colonial gaze transposed into science fiction. Terraforming, it's not just a backdrop. It's a central metaphor for the ideological battleground of the novel. It represents the struggle over who controls the narrative of progress, who benefits from planetary transformation, and who is erased in the process. It's no accident that the early terraforming efforts are closely tied to the increasing presence of Earth-based corporate interests. As the landscape changes, so too does the social structure. Infrastructure brings hierarchy. Resource extraction brings inequality. The illusion of a scientific utopia gives way to the grim reality of labor camps, surveillance systems, and corporate rule. Terraforming is not liberation. Not yet. It is enclosure. It is the fencing of a new commons under the banner of progress. And so we must ask, can the transformation of a planet ever be emancipatory? Or does it always reflect the hands that shape it? Segment 2, Science, Power, and the Illusion of Neutrality. One of the most powerful myths in Red Mars, and in the world beyond its pages, is the myth of neutrality. The idea that science floats above politics, that it observes but does not intervene, that it discovers but does not impose. Yet Red Mars dismantles this illusion piece by piece. The Martian experiment is driven by scientists, yes, but not by dispassionate observers. These are actors embedded in a matrix of interests, ideologies, and historical legacies. Their tools are scientific, but their choices are political. From the earliest days of colonization, the first 100 are portrayed as brilliant polymaths, geologists, physicists, biologists, engineers. But beneath their expertise lies another layer. Each of them is a product of Earth's institutions, trained within ideological frameworks that shape how they think, what they value, and what they imagine is possible. They carry with them not only knowledge, but assumptions about hierarchy, progress, rationality, and control. John Boone, the first man on Mars, is a perfect embodiment of this contradiction. He's charismatic, optimistic, and idealistic, the hero archetype, seemingly above politics. Yet his vision of a better Mars is deeply rooted in liberalism, in the belief that reasoned dialogue and open democracy will naturally emerge in a new environment. Boone believes that Mars will redeem humanity, that the new world will be unburdened by Earth's history. But this belief is itself a political stance, a refusal to confront the structures that made Earth what it is. Boone's neutrality is not neutral. It is ideological naivete. Contrast that with Frank Chalmers, who understands that power flows through systems, and that systems do not change by goodwill alone. Frank is cynical, calculating, often cruel, but he sees the terrain more clearly. He knows that science is only one factor in a larger equation, that governance, economics, and ideology shape outcomes more than data. He's a realist in the mold of political theorists like Antonio Gramsci, who argued that power is not just held by force, but by hegemony, the normalization of certain ways of seeing the world. Science in Red Mars becomes the battleground for this contest of visions. Sax Russell, the purest embodiment of scientific rationalism, wants to terraform Mars as quickly and efficiently as possible. His belief is that facts, models, and data can guide planetary transformation, that the numbers will decide. But even Sax cannot escape the politics of his position. The choices he makes, what to prioritize, what risks to take, what futures to favor, are shaped by his own values. His science is not objective. It is embedded in a worldview that sees the world as a system to be optimized. This is where the work of feminist theorists like Donna Haraway becomes indispensable. In her concept of situated knowledges, Haraway rejects the idea of a, quote, God trick, the view from nowhere that claims universal objectivity. She argues instead that all knowledge is produced from a position, from a context, from a body. These scientists of Red Mars are not omniscient narrators. They are situated actors. their work entangled in the messiness of politics, identity, and power. Even the environmentalists in the novel are not immune. Hiroko Ai, who leads a group of radical eco-spiritualists, embraces a quasi-mystical view of Mars as a living being, the Ariophany. Her vision challenges the dominant scientific paradigm, but it also creates a new orthodoxy. Her followers develop rituals, hierarchies, and symbolic frameworks that become exclusionary. What begins as a resistance becomes a new form of control. This dynamic reflects a broader truth, that no form of knowledge is innocent. All epistemologies, whether positivist science, spiritual ecology, or techno-utopianism, shape the societies they create. Michel Foucault's concept of power and knowledge is especially useful here. Foucault argued that knowledge does not simply reflect the world, it produces it. Scientific regimes define what counts as truth, what bodies are legible, what futures are thinkable. On Mars, this is literalized. The decisions of scientists, where to build, how to terraform, what resources to extract, determine the very shape of the planet. But they also determine who gets to live there, under what conditions, and with what rights. Scientific authority becomes political authority. The laboratories become command centers. As the Martian colony grows, this dynamic intensifies. The scientists who once imagined themselves as pioneers of truth become managers of infrastructure, arbiters of policy, and, often unwittingly, enforcers of exploitation. They sign contracts with Earth-based corporations. They create surveillance systems to track laborers. They manage dissidents through behavioral algorithms and psychological profiling. The tools of science are repurposed into tools of control. This is the tragedy of the scientific elite in Red Mars. Not that they're evil, but that they fail to see how deeply compromised their neutrality has become. They believe they're building a better world, but they're building it with the same logic that destroyed the old one. And yet, there are cracks in this system. As the novel unfolds, characters begin to question their own assumptions. Sax, after a period of exile, becomes radicalized. Maya, once obsessed with control, begins to grasp the human toll of their experiment. Even Boone's legacy is reinterpreted by the revolutionaries who come after him, not as a failed savior, but as a symbol of what might have been. Red Mars teaches us that science is not the enemy, but it is never enough. Without political consciousness, without structural analysis, without collective accountability, science becomes just another tool in the hands of power. So the question is not whether we can build a new world with science, but whether we can build science into a new world. Segment 3, Class Struggle on the Red Planet. As the Martian colony expands, the dream of a rational scientific utopia gives way to something far more familiar, a world marked by inequality, coercion, and resistance. Red Mars begins as a tale of exploration and transformation, but by its middle chapters, it becomes a story of class conflict, a narrative shaped by the fault lines of labor, ownership, and power. The Red Planet, far from being a blank slate, becomes a battleground where the contradictions of Earth's capitalism are not only preserved, but intensified. Early on, the first 100 are isolated from these dynamics. They're elite scientists and engineers, operating in relative autonomy. But as the terraforming effort scales up, the colony requires more labor. Not the visionary kind, but the kind that mines regolith, lays cable, constructs habitats, and maintains machines. Thousands of workers are shipped in from Earth, often from the global south, under exploitative contracts managed by transnational corporations. The myth of scientific progress collapses into a system of neo-colonial labor extraction. This is where Marx's insights in Capital become indispensable. He reminds us that capitalism is not primarily about markets or innovation. It's about the extraction of surplus value from labor. The Martian economy replicates this logic almost perfectly. Workers are alienated from the fruits of their labor, trapped in inhospitable environments, and increasingly subjected to surveillance and discipline. Meanwhile, profits flow back to Earth, to the very corporations that funded the mission and now seek to enclose Mars as a private asset. The Martian working class is diverse, linguistically, culturally, economically, and that fragmentation is weaponized by the companies in power. Workers are assigned to different sectors and habitats, separated by distance and purpose. This fragmentation mirrors what Cedric Robinson termed racial capitalism, the idea that capitalism has always been racialized, using hierarchies of identity to justify and facilitate exploitation. On Mars, labor is stratified not only by skill, but by origin. Western technicians supervise, while workers from poorer nations perform the most dangerous and underpaid tasks. Resistance is difficult, not because injustice is invisible, but because solidarity is systematically undermined. The colonialist dimension of this system is hard to ignore. Workers are not colonists in the same sense as the first 100. They are not there to imagine new worlds, but to sustain the vision of others. They're extractive tools, valued only in relation to productivity. This echoes the structure of imperial labor systems on Earth, from indentured servitude to corporate mining camps, where people were uprooted, relocated, and governed without rights. As living conditions deteriorate and wages stagnate, discontent grows. Strikes begin to ripple across the colony. Demands emerge for better air, more food, safer conditions. At first, these are framed as technical problems. Management assumes they can be solved with adjustments to rations or work rotations. But they are not technical problems. They are political ones. The question is not whether Mars can sustain human life. It's whether it can sustain a just society. David Harvey's work on urbanization and capital circulation offers crucial insights here. In Rebel Cities, Harvey shows us how space is produced under capitalism, how infrastructure and geography are used to manage populations, concentrate power, and facilitate capital flow. The Martian settlements exemplify this perfectly. The cities are built to optimize resource access and labor control, not to foster community. Transit systems move goods more efficiently than people. Housing is rationed and surveilled. Public space is minimal. Resistance, when it comes, often begins with geography, with blockades, sabotage, and reappropriation of space. This is where we see the emergence of true political consciousness among the Martian workers. Their rebellion is not spontaneous. It is the culmination of structural pressure. Leaders emerge, not from the scientific elite, but from the ranks of labor. Organizers who begin to see that the problem is not mismanagement, but the system itself. Their slogans evolve from demands for reform to demands for autonomy. The idea of Mars as a corporate colony is no longer tolerable. The horizon expands. What if Mars could be free? We see this ideological shift in the formation of new political groups. Some advocate syndicalism, the direct control of production by workers. Others form eco-socialist alliances, linking labor justice with environmental stewardship. The most radical begin to argue for full planetary independence, not just from Earth's governments, but from Earth's capitalism. This evolution mirrors real-world movements throughout history. From the Paris Commune to the Zapatistas, revolutionary labor has always begun with material conditions, but moved quickly towards structural critique. Red Mars tracks this arc beautifully. The Martian working class transforms from a dispersed labor pool into a revolutionary subject, not because they are taught, but because they live the contradictions of a system that treats them as expendable. Yet this class struggle is not neat or unified. Internal divisions persist. Violence erupts. Some scientists side with the workers, others with the capital. The old alliances fracture. And just like on Earth, the ruling class does not relinquish power willingly. Security forces are deployed, dissidents are arrested, sometimes disappeared, entire communities are blacklisted, and still, the resistance grows. Red Mars does not romanticize this struggle. It shows its messiness, its failures, its moral compromises, but it also reveals something vital, that even on a new world, under the thin sky of an alien planet, the fight for dignity, justice, and liberation endures. The terrain may be different, but the class struggle remains. Segment 4, Revolutionary Rupture. Revolution doesn't come to Mars all at once. It builds, slowly, unevenly, invisibly at first. It gathers in murmurs, in walkouts, in late-night meetings. It simmers in the eyes of overworked miners, in the whispered conversations of disillusioned scientists, and in the encrypted transmissions of organizers scattered across the Martian surface. Red Mars captures this buildup with remarkable fidelity, showing how revolutionary conditions don't simply arise, they are made, constructed brick by brick out of exploitation, disillusionment, hope, and necessity. What ultimately detonates is not just a rebellion against unfair conditions. It's a break with legitimacy, a rupture in the ideological consensus that has kept the system intact. In the early phases of unrest, Earth still holds sway. The transnational corporations, backed by governments and economic blocs, believe Mars is theirs to manage, a distant outpost to be administered. But as resistance grows, their control begins to slip. Supply lines are threatened. Corporate administrators are targeted. Infrastructure is sabotaged. And most dangerously, the Martian workers and scientists begin to see themselves not as employees or subjects, but as Martians, as something new. This psychological shift is crucial. Amilcar Cabral, the revolutionary leader of Guinea-Bissau, argued that liberation struggles must be rooted in cultural renewal, that decolonization is not merely about ejecting the colonizer, but about reimagining the self. The people of Mars, fragmented by language, class, and purpose, begin to find common cause in their shared condition. They forge a new identity through resistance. The revolution is not just political, it is ontological. They become Martian by choosing to break with Earth's systems. The trigger point in Red Mars is sudden, but not without warning. A coordinated uprising is launched during a high-profile anniversary event, when many of the planet's political and economic leaders are gathered. Explosions ripple throughout the city of Burroughs. Transit hubs are shut down. Communications blackout. Key figures are assassinated, and in a matter of hours, the illusion of stability collapses. But this is no tidy insurrection. What follows is chaos, not the triumphant rise of a new order, but the implosion of the old one. Infrastructure fails. Habitats are damaged, security forces fracture. Earth's response is swift and brutal, deploying armed contingents and imposing martial law. The corporations move to reclaim their assets, but their tools no longer function as they once did. Workers refuse orders. Engineers sabotage critical systems. Entire outposts declare autonomy. In this chaos, competing visions emerge. Some factions push for a new centralized government. Others favor decentralized collectives. Some want to preserve the scientific institutions of the first 100. Others want to dismantle them entirely. The revolution is not one, it is many. And in this multiplicity lies both its strength and its danger. The characters at the heart of the story reflect this tension. Maya struggles to maintain order. Sax, radicalized by his experiences, throws himself into the revolutionary underground. Anne withdraws, believing the violence validates her opposition to colonization altogether. There are no easy answers, only choices and their consequences. Rosa Luxemburg once warned against the tendency to substitute reform for revolution, to seek minor concessions rather than structural change. But she also recognized the risk of authoritarianism in revolutionary movements, the danger of suppressing dissent in the name of unity. Red Mars embodies this contradiction. The revolution creates space for imagination, for possibility, but it also unleashes repression, counter-revolution, and opportunism. The most haunting moments in the novel are not the explosions, but what comes after. Who governs now? Who decides what Mars will become? The people have seized power, or fragments of it, but the question of how to wield that power remains unresolved. Revolutionary rupture clears the ground, but building something new is a different kind of struggle. Antonio Gramsci spoke of the interregnum, the period when the old world is dying and the new one struggles to be born. In that moment, he wrote, "A great variety of morbid symptoms appear." We see this clearly on Mars. The revolution tears down the edifice of corporate rule, but what follows is contested, unstable, fragile. It's a time of experimentation, but also of violence, a time of hope, but also fear. And yet, the rupture matters because it breaks the spell. It proves that even the most advanced, technocratic, seemingly inevitable system can be undone. That the future is not fixed, that another world or another planet is possible. Red Mars refuses to give us a clean resolution. It doesn't offer a blueprint. Instead, it dramatizes the stakes of revolutionary transformation, the price, the promise, the peril. It reminds us that utopia is not handed down. It must be built. And that building begins, always, with the courage to break. Final thoughts. Red Mars challenges us to imagine not just new worlds, but new ways of being. Beneath the novel's sweeping scope and intricate politics lies a fundamental question. What kind of future are we building, and for whom? In exploring the terraforming of Mars, we've seen how ideology shapes even the most scientific of endeavors. We've watched as the myth of neutrality falls away, revealing how deeply knowledge is intertwined with systems of power. We followed the rise of class struggle on a planet that was supposed to escape Earth's burdens, only to replicate and intensify its contradictions. And we've witnessed a revolutionary rupture, not as a neat solution, but as a necessary and dangerous break from a system that could no longer contain the people within it. The characters of Red Mars are flawed, idealistic, cynical, and driven. They're us, fractured, contradictory, hopeful. And through them, Kim Stanley Robinson offers not just a mirror, but a provocation. He asks us to look beyond the spectacle of space exploration and toward the politics that accompany every step into the unknown. In the novel, Mars is not a blank canvas. It's a contested space, a place where ideologies collide, where systems unravel, and where revolution becomes both possible and perilous. That struggle is not unique to fiction. It's the same struggle we face here on Earth. As we continue this journey through speculative fiction, we'll keep asking hard questions. Who controls the future? Whose voices are being heard? What ideologies lie hidden beneath the surface of our stories and our systems? Because in every imagined world, there are truths about our own, and in those truths, perhaps, the seeds of liberation. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Red Horizons. If you found value in today's exploration, please consider sharing the podcast with comrades, friends, and fellow travelers. Every download, every mention, every spark of conversation helps keep this project alive. If you'd like to support the show directly, you can find us on Patreon at RedHorizonsPod. For questions, comments, or revolutionary reading suggestions, email us at redhorizonspod@proton.me. Red Horizons is written and hosted by Steve McPhail. Original music by Parker Kent.